big swath of the country dealing with dangerous storms today. It could make traveling difficult for some spots like what you see here in Minnesota. We'll pinpoint the areas facing hail, damaging winds, and isolated tornadoes. Well, thanks so much for being with us here today on Weather Center Live. I'm meteorologist Jackie Jarris reporting live from home. We've got storm specialist Mark Elliott, who is in the lab today. And of course, all eyes on Cristobal, which actually made landfall earlier today, Mark.
Yeah, one of the strongest storms for this time of year to make landfall. Cristobal days away from then impacting the United States. So now is the time to prepare. I want to give you some of the latest stats so you're aware of what is happening near the Yucatan and then through Mexico. 60-mile-per-hour winds as of the latest advisory. A movement still kind of drifting on off towards the south more than anything else, but kind of south-southeast at this point, near 3 miles per hour. So barely moving. It's more a drift at this point. And so where the rain has been, the rain will continue. I think that's going to be one of the big trouble spots with just flooding rains, maybe some mudslides and debris flows. Tropical systems often have a big surge of cold cloud tops and big organization in the overnight hours. So the combination of land interaction and the fact that we're going into the day has brought some of those cold cloud tops down a bit. We'll see just how much is left after this thing comes back over the water, because it is forecast to come back over the water. It made landfall already into Mexico. There will be some sort of U.S. impact, but it is still too soon to exactly know the track, largely because we don't know how much of that circulation will still reemerge over the waters, and exactly where that reemergence happens will have huge impacts down the line, right? The unknowns get bigger and bigger with time. And so the forecast does bring modest strengthening back to, a strong tropical storm into the northern Gulf of Mexico. But Jackie, you can make the argument that there's even a little bit more uncertainty with this one than even the traditional uncertainty with these tropical systems. So we need to watch the Gulf Coast, but there's a lot of question marks down the road still.
Yeah, a lot of them for sure. Intensity forecasting, not quite as solid usually as the track forecasting too. So that's something else we really need to pay close attention to. So we really need to look at some of the steering mechanisms and what's been leading this back into parts of Mexico and what's going to help to draw this back up towards the north. So right now we're looking at that big ridge of high pressure that's kind of anchored in spots right now across the U.S. That ridge building into parts of Mexico and has been pushing it very lightly, not very quickly, down towards the south. Now that ridge is likely to shift just a little bit off towards the east, and eventually we'll get a weakness beginning to build in that ridge. So still thinking that we'll watch for that to kind of linger around Mexico into the Bay of Campeche through tomorrow, and then eventually watch this begin on up towards the north and work its way into the Gulf of Mexico. And that's when we would expect it to begin to strengthen and work its way a little closer towards the U.S. coastline. So we'll watch for that trip to happen throughout the day on your Friday. And then as we head into Saturday, we'll watch it enter northern parts of the Gulf, where the waters, by the way, are a little bit cooler, and we might be encountering just a little bit of southwesterly shear. So that's something we're going to have to watch for as well. In the meantime, we've got very warm water temperatures, and that is the fuel that you need to help make this re-strengthen as it moves up towards the north. But notice as we take a look at some of those sea surface temperatures, they're not quite as unusually warm into the northern Gulf. That will be somewhat of a player, but that's just one of the many factors that we look at that could be impacting the intensity of this storm over time. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the models are trying to do now, and showing you that the GFS and the Euro are showing similar scenarios, but they're not exactly precise just yet. And one of the big things I just want to point out too, Mark, is that when we talk about the cone and where that is, that's just where the center of the storm could be making landfall or moving towards. And look at all the impacts, especially on the right-hand side of the storm. So even folks outside of the cone through the Big Bend area, and stretching even towards Tampa Bay, could be seeing some big-time impacts down the line.
Yeah, no matter where this center goes, there's going to be a lot of rain on the way. For someone across the southeast, I think eventually this is going to be too much rain. Potential for dangerous flooding, especially considering how rainy it has been. I think Florida, as you're looking at Pensacola here, has kind of been the exception overall. That's one of the drier spots. New Orleans, you know your issues with too much rain too quickly. So a flood threat that will only expand across much of the southeast. Let's give you some context. Let's talk a little bit more about where it has been so rainy, and that is the bulk of the southeast, especially interior sections of the southeast, from Atlanta across much of Alabama, Huntsville and Birmingham, Mississippi and Jackson, interior South Carolina towards Greenville. These areas have seen anywhere from a little over a foot to basically 2 feet of surplus rains so far this year. That is a lot of rain. Now, I said Florida, and really the Gulf Coast itself has been the exception to that. If you're right along that I-10 corridor, you actually have a little bit of a deficit, and so you have a little bit more bandwidth in the soils, but there's a limit to that. If you get too much rain too quickly, it doesn't matter what the long-term deficit is. You can still overwhelm those soil moistures. As for Florida, we know how much rain Miami had last week and the week before. You were in a deficit, no more. Miami now in a surplus of a foot, but that is, again, not the same for everybody. Right now, we've got a lot of tropical moisture already streaming on through. We're starting to see the humidity on the increase through much of the southeast. You've been through a nice little dry period from Atlanta and points eastbound. I think that's going to start to change over the next couple of days as we really see that tropical moisture start to increase. So even before the organized tropical rains move in, we're going to start to increase the humidities across the south. And Jackie, that will be the appetizer round. Scattered showers and storms to the southeast will start to increase that soil moisture before the rain from Cristobal arrives.
Yeah, it's going to be a really active week there for sure. Another big story that we're tracking is what's going on across parts of the east. We've got summer heat. We've got storms that have been firing up. We've got a live look here at New York City, where some serious storms could be developing later on this afternoon. Some could be on the severe side, especially south of New York City. This will likely come in rounds today. So we've already seen some really nasty storms work their way across parts of Pennsylvania, and a complex of storms with a history of producing some tree damage and some power outages. We still have a severe thunderstorm watch, which is in effect for southeastern Pennsylvania as well as much of New Jersey, and that's basically just due to that one complex I was talking about until 3 o'clock. Let's go ahead and show you the main risk area that we're talking about in addition to the watch, and it's a large area that we're talking about from the nation's midsection through the Ohio River Valley and then stretching into the mid-Atlantic and into parts of the Northeast. So damaging winds, the primary form of severe weather, but we can't rule out some marginally severe hail, perhaps an isolated tornado, but the overall tornado threat here is relatively low. We've already clocked some winds around 80 miles per hour in Reading, Pennsylvania, as that line pushed on through. And you can see severe thunderstorm warnings remaining in effect for this complex. So you need to take these warnings seriously. If you are out ahead of the line of this storm or in it, you definitely need to seek shelter because these have a history of producing damage. Now, the atmosphere is going to reload itself, and we expect more thunderstorms to fire up later this afternoon and continue into tonight. So there you can see the future radar kind of fizzling out that complex as it moves offshore, and then all of a sudden, boom, 4, 5, 6 o'clock tonight, we'll start to see more storms developing and clustering of thunderstorms that could also be severe. Heavy rain with these too, Mark.
Yeah, I would argue the biggest threat, Jackie, as you mentioned, is that straight line wind threat. I mean, those storms in South Jersey right now are really packing a punch, and the potential for that refiring later today means that you have to be ready for these strong winds. So how does that work? Well, you get a big thunderstorm, and a mature thunderstorm at that. It can start to kind of suck in some air from the environment around the storm. Now, that often has drier air coming into the mid-levels of the storm. You meet up that dry air with some of the the heavy rain and the hail within the storm, and you start evaporating it. And just like stepping out of a pool on a warm summer day, if you have water on your skin that starts to evaporate, you can feel cold. That evaporational cooling happens in our atmosphere too. And so you cool down a pocket of air, it's heavier, it's denser than the air around it, and it will start to plunge its way down towards the ground, accelerated by the fact that there's still usually some steady rains pushing down through the storm at that point. So you get this burst of wind that comes down towards the ground. It does not continue to go through the ground, of course, so it spreads out, keeping that kind of storm motion, and it will knock objects down like trees, all down in that same direction. So that is one thing that the National Weather Service survey teams would look for, Jackie, to determine if it was straight line winds as opposed to a tornadic wind. Of course, treat these storms seriously, get inside and away from the windows when they come through.
Yeah, it's been active across parts of the upper Midwest, too. Take a look at some of this video that we have as storms rolled through the region yesterday. Blue Earth, Minnesota, which is in southern parts of the state, smacked by heavy rain, lightning, and strong winds. Some winds were clocked as strong as 50 miles per hour. A tornado was also reported in the area. So Minnesota looking a little bit better today, but we'll be watching the Dakotas, parts of Nebraska into Kansas, Missouri through Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio for strong to severe thunderstorms this afternoon and later on for tonight. We've got a frontal boundary slowly sagging its way down towards the south. We've got ample moisture, which is pumping in ahead in advance of that cold front. And we've got a lot of instability too. All that heat building in with our upper ridge that we've been talking about, bringing those record high temperatures the last couple of days, helping creating some of that lift and some of that energy into the atmosphere. Now, when we take a look at what's happening aloft, we need strong winds aloft.